Hi everyone, this is Dr. Zeus Salmianis, also known as Citizen Zeus in my creative and citizenship capacity. This video is going to be an interesting one. It really has to do with how do you combat a hybrid virus. I think that COVID-19 has been a great challenge and one of the most interesting things that have hit us precisely because it doesn't fall into a category. Usually you have respiratory viruses like flus and colds that are transmitted through the air. They get into the lungs, usually affecting the lungs, bronchial tubes, and so forth. If it gets an advanced stage, it's more like pneumonia. Or you have blood, immune, nerve type of viruses that get into the body, usually with bodily fluids, either through sexual intercourse or through shared needles or blood transfusions or other things that either break the skin or get ingested in some kind of way, make their way into the blood. What's unique about the COVID-19 virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, is that it seems to be a hybrid. This leaves many people, as I have, to not only speculate, but to point to evidence that it may have been a hybrid bug created in a lab. And we will look, that's already been, I've already explored that in detail. But right now I want to know, how do you combat something that has both these components, a respiratory component and one that is very much about blood, immune, and I would even say nerve. So let's click right on. I'll put myself into the corner here. And let's click on the first article. This first article is from a medical, one of the premier medical institutions in the country, certainly the University of California, San Francisco, and probably the world in many, many specialty areas. And even they admit, we thought it was just a respiratory virus. We were wrong. How does it differ from merely a respiratory virus? Here's how COVID-19 differs, the SARS-CoV-2. Once inside a few initial host cells, the virus sets them to work, churning out copies of itself. Within hours, thousands of new virus particles begin bursting forth, ready to infect more cells. Although SARS-CoV-2 is less deadly than the original SARS virus, and this is true of many viruses, they tend to accommodate more toward you living so that they can live. And although it's less deadly, which emerged than the SARS, it replicates more rapidly. And unlike SARS, which primarily infects the lungs, SARS-CoV-2 replicates throughout the airway, including the nose and throat, making it highly contagious, like the common cold. But unlike the common cold, if we scroll down even further, and I've said this in my previous videos, so it's interesting to get this affirmation here. Again, we talked about the underlying conditions like diabetes and obesity affecting it. But it also said here, it had to do with hijacking. Here's the relevant paragraph here. Conklin doesn't think SARS-CoV-2 necessarily kills heart cells outright, because there's been a lot about that in the news as well. Myocarditis, which is this swelling of the heart and interruption of the heart. Rather, in the process of copying itself, the virus steals pieces of the genetic instruction that tell the heart cells how to do the job. Quote, it's hauling away and hijacking stuff that's necessary for the heart to beat, he says. He's currently testing his hypothesis using human heart cells grown in vessels in the lab and so forth. So again, this virus gets transmitted by respiration, but once it gets into the body, it's beginning to hijack cells. Why is this important to you and me? And why is it important to vaccines and ways to actually combat this? Because our traditional vaccines don't have an understanding of this hybrid nature. And if they don't have an understanding of this and they rush it out, we could be in some serious trouble. I've talked about it in my other videos about antibody-dependent enhancement. That is, if you emphasize the wrong things in your vaccine, you'll get your body to occupy energy in that production, but then you leave blind sides open. And we want to have a full-scale, comprehensive, healthy response to this virus, which you need with a hybrid virus. You can't just target the respiratory aspect, the blood aspect, the immune aspect, or the nerve aspect. You have to do all of these. And in so doing, we have to have a comprehensive approach. Now, I've talked about a lot of those approaches, vitamins, other aspects and even more conventional scientific therapies and those other aspects in my other videos. So if you're interested in a more in-depth explanation, I would ask you to go there. But this is a New York Times article, which I happen to agree with. I don't happen to agree with much with the New York Times, but this I agree with. This is all beyond stupid. Experts worry about Russia's rushed vaccine, and for the reasons I just mentioned. There's no evidence from large-scale clinical trials that these things work and so forth. Again, it seems to be much more political. Now, again, this virus is acting in ways that do not mimic a seasonal virus. If you look at the ways in which we've had a big wave of deaths in the United States, a smaller wave, and then it's kind of evened out. And actually the number of cases has more or less skyrocketed. In fact, if I look, if I can look over here, yes, you can see in this graph, we've had one big flump of cases in the United States. It went up even higher, and then another one that's rising again, and maybe even higher than that. Now, the death rates are quite a bit less, as we will see, because our bodies, not only that our bodies are beginning to accommodate these, but the more vulnerable people in our population are being eliminated. And this overwhelmingly affects much older people and overwhelmingly leaves pretty much untouched, for the most part, younger people, with some very few exceptions. We don't know the longer term implications of this in terms of things like the heart, myocarditis and other things. So there's still caution here. We're not just saying throw them back into schools, but at the same time, there is a big difference between the two of them. In fact, that difference is so dramatic in some senses that as I will show you later. But in a lot of these states, you'll notice there was a first wave. These are all death rates, and then a second wave. The second wave was almost always a little bit less than the first, at least when you compare it to the total number of cases. And here in California, it was a little bit more on the second one, but the cases just took off like a shot. And the death rate maintained at a proportionally much lower rate. So let's go to the next one. Let's look at United States' cases overall. This is deaths in the United States. If you notice, there was a biggest spike in the first wave, and that was the early one, when there weren't nearly as many cases. And then another thing of death, and then it's planing off a little bit and maybe going even lower, even though the cases are beginning to jump again. Look at the cases here. Low, this is where we had our biggest death rate. Cases jumped up, mostly with younger people again, okay? And this is true the world over, who are less susceptible to this and less likely to die from it. And it looks like we're gonna have a third wave here soon. This is true in other countries as well. Here's Sweden. Again, everyone talked about Sweden's system and how poorly it worked. I say that no, actually, Sweden is doing a good job creating a middle course between shutting everything down and just ignoring everything, like we're pretty much a good part of the United States is doing. If you look at new cases in Switzerland, it leaped up in the middle here. It's beginning to go up again. But when you look at actual deaths are near zero, 1 or 2 a day, okay? So again, our bodies are learning to accommodate these things in our population, and the more vulnerable people who have caught this are beginning to be eliminated from the population, unfortunately. United Kingdom is having the same thing. A little uptick in deaths now, but notice huge uptick in cases. So our populations and our bodies are beginning to get some equilibrium with this, but we've got a long ways to go. This is a complicated virus, and it's also one that our bodies don't easily know what to do with. So being able to be respectful of the virus and being respectful of what our body needs is good. I happen to agree with a lot of the not so much shutdown or so-called lockdown, but I'll just call it rest and reflection, because in our very, very manic modern society, one of the things we forget and neglect is sleep and relaxation. And one of the greatest and unknown and unrecorded reasons, I think, for the lowered fatality rate is that people, when they stay at home, do get that rest. Even if they're vegging out in front of a Netflix documentary or something like that, Their bodies are down and not simply amped up. They're not going to the mall because the malls are shut down and so forth. This has created a much more parasympathetic or relaxed response. And that parasympathetic response is critical to being able to address this virus because it's an inflammatory virus. When we die and when we get hospitalized, it has to do with a very much combination of factors leading to a hyperinflammatory response in the body. And usually those are the kinds of things that lead in combination with certain weaknesses and underlying conditions to death. So let's go one further on this. This is my local. This is Placer County where I live in California. And again, if you take the time to look at that small first bump, okay, had something in the order of 9 to 12 deaths, and this huge bump, and it stayed up in terms of new cases, and most of them among young people, if you see over here, in the cases by age, okay, accounted only for, frankly, another maybe 40 deaths overall. If you actually look at hospitalizations and death, again, it's almost all among simply the, let me see if I can move this down a little bit. It's almost all among just 50 and above, but most in particular 65 and above. And if you looked in here, it's almost always 80 and above. So it's much, much older people that are dying from this. I'm not saying that's a good thing, or but I'm saying that this virus is unique in the way that it is taking, in the way that it is affecting people that are older much, much more than people who are younger, as we saw with that graph. So let's go forward. I'm just dropping this in here to let you know also another way in which how dramatic it is. I think it was on the order of 160 children had died from flu in the last flu season, which was a medium flu season. And I counted only about 60 in this report. Now this report is in mid-July. It was already well underway, but in California in mid-July, 25,000 cases of children getting COVID and not a single death. We will see why that is, but for the most part, this virus seems to really attack dead and damaged cells. And if you have underlying conditions and or you're more aged, you tend to have more of those. Now, how is it reproducing? This virus is reproducing. It's spiking up again in certain states above 1. That's the things in red here mean that it's going to continue to grow. And the ones that are below 1 continue to go down. And if you look at California's spread, California has done actually a remarkable job. After the initial infection, spread has really maintained, even during that second reopening, at a fairly even sub 1 level, which means that it's not going to spread as much. And they've done that with something in the order of 30, 34 deaths per 100,000 of population, which is much, much better than New York, about 1/5 of what it is in New York and New Jersey. Part of this reason is that on the East Coast, they got a mutated strain of COVID-19 that came through Europe, which was a lot harsher. And on the West Coast, we got maybe the original one or a slightly differently mutated strain came from China, and it seemed to be, frankly, a gentler challenge to our body. So, we're gonna go to the next one here. That kind of sets things up. Okay. We are beginning to, this I will do in my next video. I'll just go back here, to get you to the original screen. But what I wanted to let you know here is that, yes, we are going to have to combat this in a much more comprehensive way. We can't simply just use the silver bullet approach. I've said in my other videos that I do not think an effective vaccine will be created for this because it will not be comprehensive enough to handle the hybrid nature of this virus, okay? It will target one aspect, and frankly, vaccine companies have done it by trying to create an inflammatory response. And this virus already creates its own inflammatory response. It almost acts as an autoimmune disease. And if we pile in vaccines that trigger even greater cytokine storms, those are those inflammatory elements within the body that attract antibodies to a site of infection or infected cells, then we actually may be adding to the problem. In my next video, I'm going to talk about this, especially since Trump took a regime of, let's just say, a whole cocktail full of things, and whether or not that's going to be effective enough. My thesis is that it's not. That maybe some immune therapy that is a certain kind of vaccine combined with sleep, hydration, low inflammatory diet, exercise, vitamin D, certain vitamins, and getting out in the sun, things that we've already seen in conventional science help a lot, will be required. This thing is actually asking us to be responsible for our health in an unprecedented way. So there is hope here, because this is bringing us forward, and this virus is a teacher. It's a great revealer of our underlying social conditions, which have us going crazy and neglecting our health and the more important things in our life, and also our personal choices and lives. So with that, again, thanks for listening. We will start with the next video here. I'm trying to split these up, not have them as long. So again, thanks for watching. We will talk later.